All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today on today's Q&A Cafe, where we will compare and contrast BusinessOne and ByDesign with your hosts Alex Waddell and Shannon Kennedy. My name is Sabine. I'll be your facilitator for today, and we'll be recording today's session, so everyone will remain on mute, and we'll reserve some time towards the end for some questions. You can enter your questions on either the questions or chat box, which I will be monitoring on your GoToWebinar dashboard, and we'll be sending out the recording to everyone here today. And we will also have it posted on our YouTube channel where you'll be able to find it there as well. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Shannon.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Sabine, for your introduction. My name is Shannon Kennedy, and I work at VistaView on the B1 side. I am currently a CSM, or a Customer Success Manager, but I have experience on the SAP BusinessOne implementation services, as well as support side. So I'll be joining Alex today in our discussion in comparing and contrasting some SAP BusinessOne main features, as well as ByDesign.
Thanks, Shannon. So my name is Alex Waddell, and I've been with VistaView for over 14 years. And I have a background in BusinessOne and ByDesign. I'm really excited to be here today with Shannon because she's got a lot more current knowledge in BusinessOne than I do. So I've been focused on ByDesign, specifically the finance module, for the last 5 years. And I've done multiple implementations. I've acted as an implementation consultant, as a solution architect, and more recently as an instructor for the product. So our goal today is to really just help you understand what some of the key differences are. The migration path is very typically from BusinessOne to ByDesign as your needs become more sophisticated. And so we wanted to help answer any questions you might have on the functional differences between the two systems. And that said, I'm not an expert on every module in ByDesign. So if you have specific questions, any question you have, we encourage you to answer it. If I don't have the knowledge, then we will get the answer back out to you. If your question is around finances, chart of accounts, sets of books, things like that, I'm sure I'll be able to help you there. And what we'd really love is just to have as much audience participation. So this is really meant for you to, probe us to help you understand how ByDesign works differently than BusinessOne. And so with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the fact that both systems do a lot of the same things. So they both do cost accounting. They both have a general ledger with full subledger support for AR and AP. They both handle foreign exchange. They both have a fixed asset module, inventory management. BusinessOne and ByDesign both do manufacturing through production orders. They allow you to do MRP runs to generate purchase orders and manufacturing events. They have CRM modules and project management, although in B1, project management is extremely basic. But I would say to a large degree in all of these modules, it's just the degree of sophistication. So manufacturing, as an example, is going to have a lot more sophistication in ByDesign. It has, an area where you can do quality control, where BusinessOne doesn't have that. So for today's event, what we're going to do is just sort of focus on a couple of key areas. So this is going to be by no means exhaustive because we can't possibly talk about every single feature that exists in one system and doesn't exist in the other. So we just tried to target some key areas that we think are important. So starting at the top, in SAP ByDesign, you run on a single database with multiple companies, meaning that when you log into the system, depending on your user permissions, you can start creating intercompany events directly in the system. And because you're running multiple databases all through the same, multiple companies through the same database, that means your reports will natively consolidate and compare those multiple companies. So that gives you the ability to have multiple sets of books to support consolidation. So this is a very good setup for our clients who are operating in different countries. If you have a Canadian company and a US company, you can choose to do your consolidation in one currency by mirroring journal entries in your parent entity. So it really works well for large organizations that have centralized services. So if you want to centralize your accounts payable department for the entire company and have those AP people keying invoices, it's easier to use a system where you can share vendors and you can have one person accessing all those legal entities. So there's built-in intercompany features. We'll talk about those in a little bit more detail in future slides. There is some ability to do have eliminations happening automatically in the system, so that assists you with consolidation of your financials. There's really powerful reporting inside SAP ByDesign with easy-to-use pivots. We'll talk about that in a bit more detail. The approval engine is more complex and more sophisticated in ByDesign. We'll talk about that a little bit. We'll talk a bit about the full three-way match process for accounts in AP, which is both good and bad because you have more steps, more processes you have to follow. So we'll explain some of that. We'll talk about the org structure and how that relates to cost accounting. And then just a couple other things that come to mind. ByDesign is completely cloud-based. It has a lot of integration for European standards as far as BAI for reconciling your banks, enhanced treasury management. And it's got a sophisticated project management module, so it works well for professional services that are doing time capture.
And on the BusinessOne side, we'll be reviewing some of the main features of SAP BusinessOne. Kind of like Alex mentioned in terms of your single database and your ability to consolidate information within a single database, SAP BusinessOne actually has an individual database for each company. That means that everything that you have inside your company can be separated from other companies. This is good in the case that you're working with separate companies with separate currencies and or separate countries altogether, and you want to keep that information separate. It allows you to distribute company management in regard to who is working within each company. It is a little bit simpler in terms of overall grand scheme of implementation, which allows you to lower the cost of ownership versus ByDesign. But both of the options are great for small to medium size up into large businesses with ByDesign. You have a ton of standard reports. We'll be reviewing a few of them today. It does have a limited flexibility in some of your reporting, whereas SAP ByDesign might allow you to pivot and create reports a little bit more ad hoc. It has approvals as well. It allows you to have advanced GL determinations and cost centers, which allows you to really drill into how things will be accounted for in your system overall. It has a very straightforward inventory management system, which allows you to track all of your inventory, multiple warehouses, bin locations. It is available in your client server or on-premise as well as cloud, and it is usable in a single tenant as well as a multi-tenant or a cloud control center. You can have access to it via a remote desktop or VPN, for an example. It also has the ability to integrate seamlessly into a lot of add-ons. If you want any additional information about those add-ons, you can certainly feel free to reach out to us separately, because during this call today, we'll just be discussing standard features in SAP BusinessOne and ByDesign. And it also will allow you to make sure that each of your companies really has a lower interaction with your other companies if needed. But SAP does allow, again, to have an add-on to allow you to work within companies. And if you want more information on that as well, you can feel free to reach out to us on that as well, and I'll get back to you. All right, so like we mentioned earlier, in terms of how SAP ByDesign works and B1 works in terms of your multiple companies, as you can see here, SAP BusinessOne has your company segregated, whereas the user logging into the system will select which company they want to go into and use your user credentials. Any of your users that have an assigned license, as long as these databases are all within your SAP installation number, all of your users will be able to access these separate databases. But keeping in mind that they're separate, it allows you to do completely separate functions in terms of all of your reporting, your company settings, even down to your currencies and your master data can all be separated within those companies. Whereas SAP ByDesign, you can actually utilize all of those companies within your one database. What that means is that, as our screenshot shows here, our journal entry voucher is open. It actually allows you to select which company you'll be entering in this journal voucher directly from your main screen. There's no need to log out of one company and log into another company to perform those transactions. So depending upon how you're working with your different companies and how you want to integrate those companies either with each other or you want to keep them completely segregated, that's really going to depend on which solution is best for you and your company. ByDesign will allow you to work with more combined and comparative data, whereas SAP BusinessOne allows you to keep everything separate, allows you to report on them separate, and also close out all of their financial accounting separately as well.
Thanks, Shannon. So I think you kind of covered a lot of those differences. I don't really have a lot to add on the multi-company. If anybody has questions about that, we'd be happy to hear them. But just to echo what Shannon said, so I would say that if your organizations, share a lot of master data, like the same suppliers and things like that, then, the ByDesign multi-company, could be useful for you. And then, like Shannon said, if your companies are very discrete in nature, they have separate data sets, you might find it easier and just sort of instinctually, the companies will operate separately, so you won't have issues with permissions, people in one company seeing data in another company, although that can be controlled to some degree in ByDesign through security rules. It is a consideration that they would see, for example, all the shared suppliers and things like that. So with that, let's move on and talk a little bit about the benefits when you are sharing data and intercompany. So in this one slide, what I wanted to illustrate, this is just a screenshot of a new invoice, and you'll see there that at the top we have a supplier, and then underneath that we have the buying company. So that would be your company name, one of your legal entities, and that company in our demo environment is called Almica Inc. So Almica is paying for this particular service. It's some shipping costs. And then you can see at the very bottom of the invoice, we have the ability to say we want to charge this to a different company. And so this AP user has the ability to, maybe the contractual relationship with ABC Cargo is with company Almica, but the expense really belongs with Inovat. And it's really invisible for the AP user. All they have to do is, enter those fields, and the system is going to take care automatically of all of the intercompany requirements, meaning that it's going to generate two journal entries in this case. So in one, it's going to credit accounts payables for Almica, but instead of debiting expense, it's going to debit due from Inovat. And then the system's going to create another journal entry in Inovat, and it's going to, in that company, say debit expense, credit intercompany. And so your intercompany is always in balance. Those are control accounts. And all of that is just really happening, through automation in the system. The user doesn't have to manually worry about intercompanies going out of balance or reconciling things. So that's how intercompany works. I'd also just like to mention there's really 4 elements of intercompany. So this is one of the simplest ones we're showing you here. Equally, just as intuitive and simple as really an intercompany journal entry. So a user can go in, debit company A, credit company B, and the system will create all the due to, due from entries. Another very simple one is cash transfers. So if you want to move cash between company A and company B, the system's going to balance those journal entries as well. And then the most sophisticated intercompany is the one that allows you to actually sell products and services between your two companies. So this works very well for our clients where they have the sort of legal structure, and maybe for some sort of tax reasons, they want one legal entity to manufacture products, and then they want a different legal entity to sell those products. And so the company that sells the product, if they get a customer and they create a purchase order, the system is smart enough that if they don't have inventory, could actually create a manufacturing event in company B, and it could create a sales order because it knows it has to sell it. So you can work kind of exclusively in one company, and the system's automatically creating the matching transaction in the other company to manufacture the good, transfer it over, sell it, create all the revenue and intercompany due from events automatically. So that's a lot of sophistication. That's something we could spend, another webinar just talking about how that one feature works. But at a very high level, that is what the intercompany features cover. And unlike BusinessOne, which really doesn't have this, and maybe I'll just hand it over to Shannon, she could just, expand on that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alex. So BusinessOne, Alex is correct. ByDesign is definitely for a company that has multiple companies that you really need to keep everything underneath one umbrella. whereas B1 does not natively do that. It does have an add-on that will allow you to interact and communicate with your separate entities in terms of your marketing documents, that's on your AR side and your AP side, as well as your item master information. It does have some limitation in terms of your financial accounting. And there is, of course, always some additional learning and implementation and configuration because it's an add-on to SAP BusinessOne. But it is available and it does integrate direct with the system. So if you'd like some more information on that, please feel free to reach out to us directly, because I can certainly discuss that in a future presentation or a one-on-one if anyone currently using SAP BusinessOne is interested in learning a little bit more about the intercompany features and how that will work for you and your company. Okay, so on our next slide here, we're going to speak a little bit about the similarities and the differences in your cost accounting inside of both systems. In SAP BusinessOne, the main financial and cost accounting that you have is your GL determination and your advanced GL determination. It utilizes and follows the GAAP, which is your general accepted accounting principles inside the system. And it really allows you to segment all of your accounts within each of your drawers, like you see here in our screenshots. It allows you to really keep separate and be able to easily and actively track what's going into each of your accounts and each of your drawers. So your assets, your liabilities, your revenues, things of that nature. It also allows you to select and configure what we call active or control accounts, which will be default accounts for specific transactions in your system. And you actually will see those in our screenshot here as green. All of those are set up to be your default GL accounts for your transactions and your postings, whereas any black ones are able to be selected. You can always update the GL account being used as long as your user has specific access within your system. So if you're entering in a specific document and you know that the standard account that it's hitting is not correct, you can always update it and select one of your other accounts as you see here. And your blue accounts are what we call your title accounts, which include all of your active or control accounts that you see in your green and your black there. In our top screenshot, you'll see that we also have the ability in SAP BusinessOne to utilize something called cost centers. Cost centers are basically a division that performs a specific function for your business in general. It will allow you to allocate either directly or indirectly expenses and revenues to that specific cost center, depending upon how you need that to work. In our screenshot here, we have our cost centers set up with our different divisions of our company. So that we're including our sales, our dev, and our supplier companies. But you can have something as simple as also setting up different countries or different states within your system as well. For example, a cost center for New York versus Chicago will allow you to really separate and report financially on those separate cost centers, and also allow the users to make sure that they're allocating their information, the inventory, and the documents to the right financial accounting. This really helps towards, say, year end when you're doing your P&L and your balance sheet, as well as closing out your month end and your year end. And now I'll pass it over to Alex, who's going to go over a little bit of the organization and the org structure for cost accounting inside of ByDesign.
Thanks, Shannon. So I didn't show a screenshot here of the chart of accounts. Instead, I just wanted to do an illustration of the org structure. So cost accounting, financial accounting structure, that the way your financial chart of accounts and your cost elements tie together is very drastically different in ByDesign versus B1. And there are various cost elements at play in ByDesign, and how you would decide to use them would really be dependent on your business needs. However, an element that is almost always mandatory or utilized is the organizational structure. So you can see that Almica company that we talked about in a previous slide has multiple profit centers, cost centers, segments, and without getting into a lot of details what those all do, you will see that they are indented. And so each of those, you can see that finance and HR and legal kind of roll up into headquarters. You can see that in our operational cost accounting, we've got a sales department for heating, we've got a manufacturing department, And then we've got sub-departments. And we've also got department ownership. So this org structure is a really important design element in your system because this is going to support the cost accounting in a similar way to what BusinessOne does, using either segmentation or cost dimensions. However, there are multiple things going on in ByDesign. So you're building this to support not just your financial accounting, but also to support potentially your approval hierarchy, which I will talk about in a future slide. And so there's a lot of sort of combined effort and thought that has to go into how to build out this org structure to support different areas of the business, depending on whether you're going to be running manufacturing, whether you're going to have a lot of approvals, or just if it's purely just a financial reporting sort of cost center roll up. So one thing that I'll point out, because this is a very powerful element, but it also does have some limitations. And a really straightforward limitation is you can see here that because this is a tree structure, you're always coding into the lowest cost center level. So for example, if we have like a cost center down here that represents third-party sales for manufacturing, if you also wanted to have third-party sales underneath sales heating, you could do that, but those are two different cost centers that are not related because they live on different branches of a tree. So if you wanted to create a financial statement for your third party, this would not be the ideal way to do it. Whereas in BusinessOne, because you have that ability to mix and match cost dimensions and segments on every transaction any way you like, you would just create, third-party sales once, and then you would combine it with, any GL. So I hope that makes some sense. And I see there's one question here about segmentation in the chart of accounts. So thank you for asking that. Yes, there is no segment value in the ByDesign chart of accounts. So if you're moving from this kind of a world, and you can see here when I talk about segmentation, what we call the natural account is this a number here, which in BusinessOne, this is an out of the box one. It's quite a long one, but typically yours is probably 5 or 6 digits. You have the concept of a natural segment, and that is it. You do not have the ability to add other segments. You only have the very first one. So that is where you have to now rely on the org structure, or potentially, the project management module. We can do cost accounting by sales orders. So there's a few other cost objects. There's something called product categories. And so we would look at all the other ways that reporting, not just financial reporting, but operational reporting, would potentially play a part in replacing using what you have set up historically in B1 as a cost center or a cost dimension segment. So I hope that makes sense. I'm going to move on if there's no other questions, and hand it back to Shannon to talk about approvals.
Great, thanks, Alex. So BusinessOne allows you to enter and utilize what we call approvals. You are able to do this by creating and entering what we call an approval stage. This is going to allow you to figure out what you need to approve and who will be the approver. The main reason that you're going to be utilizing approvals, obviously, is when you need something that is overseen by someone, more than likely your management team, and approved in a formal process to make sure that something's not occurring in the system that should not be occurring. You have the option to enter various forms of approvals. They can be subject to a min-max, or customers on hold, or a specific order, for example, that is over and above the norm for a customer. You can set up an approval process for that as well. And utilizing your approval templates is what you're going to tell SAP BusinessOne to do with that information. You can use something as simple as we see here in our screenshot, a transaction-based approval, which means that it's going to look at the specific document in question and a specific greater than, equal to, less than, equal to, or on hold, yes, no type of category options. But you can also get very complex in terms of your queries by using, in terms of your approvals rather, by utilizing queries as well. And when you're setting up with queries, you can really drill down to specific approvals for specific salespersons within your company for a specific customer, for specific items per customer, or items per warehouse being sold. So you can really drill down into that information. In terms of approval templates, they are what we call or what we deem kind of fixed in BusinessOne. What that means is if, for example, our authorizers that we see here are Tim and Daryl, our internal managers, if one of them should happen to leave our company, you do have to manually go in and update who will be the new authorizer, or simply remove one authorizer and allow one authorizer to stay. And in order to do that, you do have to make sure that the approvals inside of your approval reports, which include your status and decision reports, where you can see an overall history of all the approvals being in pending, approved, rejected, things like that. If you're a manager, that is a great overview of what's going on in your system. But in terms of when that employee leaves, you have to go in and you have to make sure that any documents that were previously pending that is related to your stage and your template are either rejected and or approved before you can update your approval stage. So that's why we call them that, we say that it is something in the system that's fixed, which could be a really good idea if you really want to make sure that your approval process is set one specific way with a little bit less flexibility, which may be good for your company because you might not want to open up the system in order to make changes or have things approved. If someone does leave, you want to make sure that that process flow stays the same. Whereas Alex will be talking a little bit about ByDesign and the ability to be a little bit more flexible in terms of your approvals inside the system.
Thanks, Shannon. So yeah, and when I think about approvals, I think that every single project I've ever worked on, they're always so drastically different. And I remember spending countless hours trying to set up BusinessOne approvals, especially if you have a lot of cost centers, because you really have to create separate stages and sort of a separate template to handle the identification of that cost center. So, and I don't want to give you the impression that ByDesign's approval engine is perfect, because depending on the complexity you have, you may end up creating quite a few approval rules. But if your needs are basic, a lot of times what you can do is create a very dynamic approval rule that ties into that org structure. So for example, in this screenshot, this work distribution rule is dynamically changing the way the approval event works. And so the ones that I kind of highlighted there, I said you can create an approval engine that says, I want my approvals to be based on the cost center manager or the manager of the project or the person who's buying the product's line unit manager, so who they report to. And the beauty of that is when people leave the organization, HR is really just hiring somebody into the old role in the system, and the approval engine doesn't need to be touched again. You don't have to worry about approvals that are hung up and things like that. So a lot of that will just sort of happen dynamically, and it makes it a much more straightforward. So I see we have one question. Sabine, did you want to let me know what that was, or are we reading it off?
Read it off.
Sure.
So we have a question here asking if there are many functional add-ons for the ByDesign product, because there are a lot with the B1 product.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't know the answer as far as the number. I would say there are a lot less with ByDesign, and I think some of that has to do with the fact that it's cloud-based. Definitely some of it has to do with the fact that it's a less mature, or it hasn't been around as long. So BusinessOne has been around for many decades, and so for that reason, there's a huge number of apps sitting in the App Store. That said, ByDesign, I mean, we here at VistaView have, our Field View app works with ByDesign. We're getting our Resolve app, which was built, and both of these apps were built for BusinessOne originally, but they have to be sort of rewritten to work with cloud-based products, and they integrate in a different way. So I hope that answers your question. If I'm not really getting to it, then feel free to add more color to that question.
Thanks for that, Alex.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so if there's no other questions about approvals, I'm going to move on to the next slide. And Shannon is going to get us kicked off talking about three-way matching in BusinessOne.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alex. So in terms of three-way matching, what that means inside of any system that you're working with is that you have a specific flow in terms of your documents, whether that is a receiving type document or a sales type document. And normally in your standard flow for BusinessOne, you would have a PO or a purchase quote copied to a purchase order. You would normally and standard have a goods receipt PO to receive in that material, and then create your AP invoice for payment. However, in SAP BusinessOne, you do have the simplicity to not utilize what we call that three-way match. And we can actually go directly from our purchase order to our AP invoice, like you see here in our relationship map, which in BusinessOne is available on a right-click menu from any of your marketing documents on your AP and AR side. And it shows you the documents that are linked to that specific document, whether it's a base document or a reference document. And it allows you to see here that we're going directly from our purchase order to our AP invoice. And then inside of our journal entry, which is open directly from our AP invoice, we're affecting inventory without doing that three-way match. Normally that three-way match would make us have to have that middle document, that goods receipt PO, in order to affect our inventory. So we're taking in material. However, this way, it will automatically allow you to affect your inventory as well as your sales and your vendor record. This is something that is simple. And for some companies, it's really great that you have the flexibility to be able to do that without necessarily having to follow one by one your process. You do have a similar option on your sales side as well. And enabling you to do this does not necessarily, of course, mean that you won't utilize those middle type documents as well. On the AR side, your delivery, and on the AP side, your goods receipt PO. It just means that you have the option to do that, and it will keep in accounting all of your information as well as your inventory accounts current, so that you're not missing any inventory coming into your system or out of your system, even if you don't have that document there. So I'm going to pass it over to Alex, who's going to talk a little bit more about the available complexity in the ByDesign in terms of your three-way matching.
Thanks, Shannon. So in these darker screenshots here, you can see, and ByDesign also has this relationship map. They call it a document flow, but it does the same thing. So it's this graphical representation. So you have the ability to do a three-way match, but the three-way match within ByDesign is more complex in that certain elements of it are mandatory, in that if you decide to use it, you have to use it completely. And what I mean by that is if you are going to do a three-way match event, so unlike BusinessOne, where Shannon was just saying you could buy something, you could decide not to receive it into your inventory, you could skip right over to the AP invoice. And BusinessOne is smart enough to know that I need to also do an increment to inventory at the same time as setting up my payable. ByDesign is not going to allow you to do that. So it's going to require you to do some sort of a goods and service receipt. And even the type of goods and service receipt is going to depend on whether you're buying inventory, whether you're paying for services. And at that point, it's going to always, debit your inventory or debit expense if it's a service. And then it's going to credit what's called the GRIR, which stands for goods receipt, invoice receipt. So that's kind of the clearing GL accounts, their control accounts. They work in the same way as like accounts payable do, So it's only a subledger that can process things through them. And the offset to that clearing account is the supplier invoice event. So then when we do the supplier invoice, it's going to now debit that GRIR and credit your accounts payable. So what does this mean to you? Well, it means that you have, a cost of complexity here because you have to do these transactions. But the trade-off to that is you also have the ability now to always enforce that your business is following this process. So this does make a lot of sense if you have dedicated receivers and shippers working in warehouses that are going to actually do that event. If you're still a small organization and it's really all of these transactions are being done by the finance department, they may feel frustration that they're having to do extra documents that aren't really meaningful to them. Why can't I just do this as part of the supplier invoice? So I've said a lot there. I mean, I do want to add a little bit more to that. So I don't want to imply that you can't just do a supplier invoice. You can do a supplier invoice without a PO. So if you get an invoice for your utilities, you don't need to do the three-way match process. But if you are managing inventory, you definitely do need to do the three-way match process. And then when it comes to things that are like services, where this three-way match can be really beneficial to you is reduction of manual accruals. So if you are doing purchase orders for services in BusinessOne, you probably already know that even though you can go in and do a goods and service receipt, there's no GL impact from doing a goods and service receipt on the service. It's not until you do the supplier invoice that the system debits service expense and credits AP. Now, if your services were actually delivered in a previous period, you may have had to manually accrue those as a journal entry. In ByDesign, the goods and service receipt essentially does that accrual for you. And so that can be a real benefit. So once again, it all depends on the size of your organization and if you see value in this or not. So the trade-off, added complexity for more accurate financial reporting and supporting a larger user base with tasks that are meaningful to them, like getting inventory registered more quickly, either inbound or outbound in your warehouse. And we're kind of getting to the end, but this reporting is pretty big. So Shannon is we had to split this up into 2 slides. So Shannon's gonna sort of give you the overview of reporting in B1.
Thanks, Alex. So in BusinessOne, you can report on various things throughout the system, of course, and it's standard out-of-the-box reporting. The screenshot that we show here is actually one of the more complex reporting options that we have. It's our general ledger information. And as you can see here, you really have the ability to drill down and make selections to really see what you need or what you want to see in your general ledger in this case. You also have the option to export to Excel in order to format your reporting how you want. The only limitation that you do have in certain areas of SAP BusinessOne is that you don't necessarily have the flexibility to change these reports on a case-by-case or a user basis. However, with the additional options to really select what you want to see, your extended date ranges, your specific accounts per business partner or financial accounting, does allow you to have a really good base for all of your reporting. You can do that also in terms of your overall sales, your purchasing, your business partners, which will include your customers and your vendors, as well as your leads. And you can really drill down and get the information that you need, but without having the ability to actually format and or drag drop information from your report, which is our second screenshot labeled General Ledger. You can use the option instead if you get a little bit good with your queries or you work one-on-one with your partner to learn how to create reports inside B1. A great option is utilizing something called the Query Generator or Query Manager inside SAP BusinessOne. B1 has the tables for SQL exposed to you. So you have the option inside the system to always see the tables in which you're working inside of your documents and inside of your records. And utilizing your query generator, it actually allows you to query each of those tables and you can create your own report. These reports can be used company-wide or just for your personal reports. And utilizing that allows you to really get exactly what you need from the system on a case-by-case basis without necessarily seeing a report that has a lot of information that you may not need for your function overall in the company. And creating those also will allow you to run a specific report on demand because you're saving that within the system, which means that you don't have to create it every time. You can really have access to that information that you need as quickly as you need it. So in terms of the overall reporting for BusinessOne, you really do have a lot of options, but you are a little bit limited depending upon how your business works in the quick kind of creation and flexibility of creating reports that you might need. That's not to say, of course, that you cannot create your complex reports by doing something like queries, which will be discussed in a later webinar as well. But as Alex will soon show you, you do have a little bit more ability to work in a more complex fashion inside of ByDesign, just simply because of the overall structure of this system in order to really fit whatever your business need might be. So this might be and is a lot of times a huge topic for new customers in deciding what system might be best for you, is how the reporting will affect you day to day, what information you need, and what the system can really do for you. So now I'm going to pass it over to Alex. He's going to show you some of the great ways that SAP ByDesign actually allows you to kind of create those reports as you go versus necessarily having to create them via the query and know a little bit more knowledge and have a better sense of the system than BusinessOne might.
Thanks, Shannon. Yeah, so before I switch to the next slide, I think one thing I want to point out is in the B1, so on the left side of the screen here, you're seeing that parameters screen that launches every report. This screen changes depending obviously on the report that you're running, but what B1 is really giving you is the ability to filter data. In ByDesign, you have the ability to filter data, but you also have the ability to pivot the data. And if you are familiar at all with Excel pivot tables, they work in a similar fashion. So I've got two screenshots here. The one that's sort of set in the back is my initial report. And I'm doing some filtering based on the fields that I want to show. I've also got a hidden tile here called selection, where I can also set even like complex parameters like date from to, which legal entity. So the actual like the what I want to show is in the selection, and that's similar to BusinessOne. But then the how I want to show it is really the power of ByDesign. And so you can see here that I've grabbed a bunch of different data elements. I can hit the little plus sign, and there are, depending on this particular data set, there can be dozens or hundreds of additional fields that I can just simply kind of click and drag to add to this report. And then where the pivot power comes is I can decide, do I want to show that in my row or do I want to show it in my column? So I've taken this exact same report and I've eliminated a couple of fields that I don't think are necessary, but I've grabbed a new field called accounting period, and I've instead decided to show that in the columns. So now I've created a very different look and feel of a report. It's still showing me that same data, but now I'm getting every single financial period in a separate column. So I'm getting comparatives. I could just as easily do my comparatives as my profit centers. My comparatives could be my financial legal entities. And so this is really the crux of how you would create your consolidated or comparative financial reports in the system, and the ability to just have a lot of dynamic interaction with the report. Now, I could talk about reports, and in fact, I have talked about reports for hours. So if you go to our vistaviewsolutions.com and you look under the resources tab, you'll see that we have a whole catalog of Q&A cafes we've run in the past. Or you can go to our YouTube channel directly and you can search for financial reporting. So we've done lots of different webinars and cafes on how reporting works in SAP ByDesign. So if you want to understand this experience better, then I would encourage you to go look at those assets. But just as far as a compare and contrast with BusinessOne, I would say that this is definitely an element of the system that people really appreciate, transitioning to this ability to have very dynamic and powerful reporting. Now, Shannon mentioned that you do have access to the table structure. And so even with just sort of limited SQL knowledge, which I had enough just to be dangerous, you can get at the tables. You can't really pivot the data easy unless you have a lot of sophisticated SQL knowledge, or maybe you're drawing that data into some sort of another tool to pivot the data. In ByDesign, you don't have access to the raw tables. Instead, you have access to hundreds of different already pre-combined data sources. And you can, that leads to really hundreds of reports, in some cases, actually probably more like thousands of reports. So over 1,000 reports, I would say, across all the different modules. And then depending on how you pivot the data, so this is the exact same report, GL accounts line item, GL account line item. Because of the way that I'm pivoting the data, I'm creating very fundamentally different looking reports. And I can save these combinations to easily come back and recreate this without having to redo all of the steps. So in that way, you can actually have, tens of thousands of combinations of reports and data sets. So it's really powerful access to your data.
Alex, we have another question here.
Mm-hmm.
So BusinessOne has Crystal reports integrated within the system for custom reporting. Does ByDesign have anything similar?
So you can run Crystal reports, but I would say that it's not that common. Depending on what you're kind of using. So when I think of Crystal reports for BusinessOne, typically it's used for the forms, like when you're talking about creating your customer invoice or your purchase order, something like that. That's an option. You could use it for output reporting, but you probably wouldn't use Crystal reports for like that GL detail report like that I'm showing or that Shannon was showing. I would say that in ByDesign, you would probably get 90% of your reporting needs through the built-in reporting tool that's there. And then we do have a different report engine. It's native to ByDesign to create your what we call forms. So once again, your AR invoice, your purchase order, and it kind of does what Crystal does. It's more like a blank canvas where you say, okay, I want the PO number to go here and I want the customer name to go here. And that is typically the tool that we can teach you how to use, or we can create those forms for you. And that's kind of the preferred way to go. And then for that very small people that are really married to Crystal, you can use Crystal with SAP ByDesign. And if you're doing like published financial statements and you want to sort of make really pretty headers and things like that and annotations in it, then Crystal reports could be useful for that. But I would say it's not really your default go-to in the same way that it is in B1.
Thank you, Alex. We have another question here. Is there any way in ByDesign that a user can create a temporary report and then join the data of the report to a separate report from a different data source based on common values of the two reports?
Yeah, yes, you can. So those data sets that we were talking about, they are available. They are exposed in the system, and that does take a little bit more technical knowledge. But once again, you don't have to be a programmer. So you could take, if you go into one of these reports, like this report that I'm showing you, and you go to hit a row field and you see that, hey, there's a field here that isn't really available. Maybe that field, and I'm just going to invent one, project, let's say, is not there, but there is a relationship somewhere between the tables. Once you have enough understanding of those data sources, you could go in and you could create your own custom data source, and you could say, okay, I want to join this project field with project field from my original source data in order to get to my destination field. So yeah, the answer is yes, you can do that. And those sort of joins are, they work out kind of like SQL query. So you have to understand the difference between an inner join and an outer join and things like that in order to create those data sources. And we do have some clients that are technically savvy and they can do that. Or sometimes we will just create that for them. It all depends on your needs.
Thank you for that, Alex.
So I think that really brings us to our conclusion. These are the areas that we chose to highlight. Like I said, this is by no means exhaustive. So there's all sorts of things. And if I just start kind of running through a list, I mean, we could create a great big table for you. We could say that dunning letters is something that's available in ByDesign. It's not in B1. I know in BusinessOne, there's a GL account reconciliation feature. It's really cool. You can kind of check different rows and match things to reconcile your accounts. ByDesign, unfortunately, doesn't have that. So we do have places where people will step into the ByDesign tool and they will kind of be up against a few things that they really liked, small features that either don't exist or just work differently, or they're much more complex. So I think the parting thought we want to leave you is just that the ease of use is really one of the big differences, right? So when you upgrade into a more complex system, that cost of ownership, I'm not really talking about the dollars for licensing or anything like that. I'm really talking about just the overhead of operating the system in the right way. So if you're going to decide that we're going to do three-way match, do you have the right departmental setup and are people positioned in a way that they're going to be able to meet all the obligations in the system of the transactions that they have to do? And I think I just also wanted to maybe mention the cloud versus on-prem. I mean, you can now get BusinessOne at cloud-based, and I know the world is kind of going towards cloud. That is still a bit of a paradigm shift for some of our clients. So there is no equivalent sort of on-premise version, There is something called private cloud, meaning you could have your own sort of dedicated partition of a server. And that still doesn't mean your data is still, stored in a server on your premise. It means it's still at one of the data centers, where all the cloud environments are stored. It just means you've got, different privileges if you have sort of that private edition. So those are kind of the things that we wanted to leave you, because those are typically the conversations that we have to have with our clients if they're thinking about upgrading. Those are some of the first things you'll want to consider. Okay, well then that's great. I want to thank everybody for their participation. So much fun to do this with Shannon, so thank you, Shannon.
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah, and we look forward to seeing you in a few months at our next webinar, the subject to be announced shortly.
Definitely, if you have any questions or concerns after this webinar that you weren't comfortable with posting, please reach out to us at the email address that's being provided, and we can have someone from the team, whether it's myself or Alex, get with you directly to make sure that we answer your questions so you understand which products would be best for you.